What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and I done goofed. I misread Joker Volume 2. So it's issues 6 through 9, which we're basically caught up, except for issue 9. So we're gonna do this one, and then once Volume 3 completes, we'll do that. There is technically an annual that goes into it, but there's no real significance in terms of what's going on here. But in the last video that we did, we basically covered the origin of Bane's daughter, right? Her whole story, how she came into existence, that she was basically created using the mental patterns and the venom formula, and then some of the biology of Bane. But it's not like Bane banged a chick and then now we have vengeance, right? It doesn't really work that way. Instead, what this does, or at least what this particular video does, is we open up here essentially with Jim Gordon telling his story to Vengeance, which is the name of Bane's daughter. I could have thought of a better name, but you know, that's the name of Bane's daughter. So the cool thing about this is he really referenced it as it being like the Joker story. And this is kind of James Tynion hitting at the idea of the Killing Joke, right? It's like the Joker story. And the reason why is, for those of you guys who don't know, the Killing Joke is the definitive Joker origin. It is, well, it's definitive insofar as the one that fans recognize as being the definitive origin. DC's never really come out and said, this is the definitive origin of the Joker. If you ever want to know where the Joker came from, go read that story. And a lot of that's because DC Comics likes to leave it ambiguous, because usually whenever they release a comic where it's like the new origin of the Joker, it always sells. And so it's better to kind of keep that thing alive as opposed to cutting themselves off at the knees and everybody just sort of referencing like, no, don't read that story. This one over here is the one that you want to read because it's official. And so as a result of this, it's really more of like a fan adopted origin. Having said that, it makes sense, right? The Killing Joke is the Joker story. I mean, for the most part, like you walk up to anybody who's familiar with DC Comics and you say like, does the Joker have an origin? They'll say, not officially, but go read the Killing Joke. It's the closest we get, right? It's the one that everybody references. And so Jim Gordon telling Vengeance this story is based off the idea that in the last video that we did, that while Vengeance was engineered to want to kill the Joker, she has this desire to do it because it was programmed in her. And so if she's going to kill the Joker, she doesn't want to do it because she was told to. She wants to do it because she wants somebody else's motivation. And so that's why Jim Gordon basically tells the story that the Joker had shown up on his doorstep and shot Barbara Gordon through the stomach, which of course damaged her spine, and she was paralyzed for quite some time. Now that of course led into the first real introduction of Barbara Gordon becoming Oracle, which is a great concept for her character. Of course, she ended up having her back healed by Lucas Fox, and that in turn allowed her to go through and become Batgirl again, right, to operate. But of course, when that happened, that Jim Gordon was basically taken by the Joker, brought to this sadistic theme park, and like forced to go through like this just hellish roller coaster to experience like all these images and all these videos of his daughter basically being brutalized by the Joker's henchmen. And what he talks about are all these experiences where the Joker in some form or fashion has screwed up his life. But it's not even really just the Joker. Like, it's just Gotham City itself, that it's a twisted and a screwed up place. And he even talks about James Gordon Jr. Now, the thing about James Gordon Jr., this is one thing to know, is that at the moment, he's technically dead, and we believe that he's dead. He really came back during the Batgirl comics, and what we ended up finding out is that like there was somebody going around almost in a kind of Jack the Ripper fashion where they were like killing different women, and James Gordon Jr. was trying to figure out who it was, only to find out that his psyche had basically split, that there was the good guy who was trying to protect Barbara Gordon and trying to keep his family safe, and then the bad guy who was the one doing the killing. So he was quite literally his own worst enemy. But nonetheless, it's all these different things that kind of feed in together and give us this idea that like Gotham City itself is a pretty rough place. And so ultimately, once you end up getting Vengeance and Jim Gordon heading towards the home of what is basically the head lab technician that of course they knew the Joker was going to go after, once they get inside, we actually end up transitioning over to Barbara and to Julia. Now again, Julia of course being the daughter of Alfred Pennyworth, the one-time girlfriend for a little while, I guess, maybe, of Kate Kane, right, of Batwoman. But her and Barbara Gordon working together are really them just trying to figure out what's going on, because in the middle of them looking into things, they were suddenly attacked by a Talon. A Talon, of course, being one of the henchmen of the Court of Owls. And so this is kind of their little side story, which will actually become important later on. But it's a little bit of their side story, kind of focusing on the other side of the equation, where you have Jim Gordon and you've got Vengeance dealing with the Joker and all that kind of stuff. And so what this does, as they're sort of looking through things, that in these different investigations and whatnot, they of course give us a bit of a recap on the development of Venom. That Venom was originally created by a scientist named Randolph Porter, that it was designed to be a really addictive version of the Miraclo formula. Now, for those of you guys who don't know, we were never really given this origin during the events of the Vengeance of Bane storyline as part of Nightfall. Instead, this actually came from Legends of the Dark Knight. Now, for those of you guys who don't know what Legends of the Dark Knight is, that's a concept in DC Comics that started out great and ended terribly. So Legends of the Dark Knight followed up Batman Year One by Frank Miller. And where Batman Year One was like, here is basically Batman's first year as Batman, that the Legends of the Dark Knight filled in the gaps. And it showed us a lot of the things that Batman was doing in the very early days. It was phenomenal when it first started. By the end, it was literally just a dumping ground for like stories that had to do with Batman but just weren't very good. Or it was a test bed, right? It was a place for people who were looking to get their shoe in the door as like writers or artists at DC Comics, where they would just be thrown on Legends of the Dark Knight to see how they write, how they draw, to see whether or not it performs or has any real benefit for readers, and then the decision would be made from there, right? Which actually happens pretty frequently. Nowadays, it's done in one-off comics. It's done in like one-shots or like Elseworld stories or what-if stories or things that don't tie into the main continuity. So that way, if the story's not well received, Marvel and DC can just write it off and just say, well, it's not in continuity, it doesn't matter, and that's it. Or if it is well received, they're like, well, I mean, it's in continuity now, and they just roll it over into their main universe. But nonetheless, right, like realizing what's going on here, there is a kind of a note, right, an addendum that's made with regards to like this whole involvement of the network, these individuals that are all just kind of out there doing their own thing, that somebody had basically sold a cruise missile to a US supervillain. Of course, this is Barbara Gordon putting the pieces together and referencing back to the events of Death in the Family and the death of Jason Todd, that this network has largely been operating behind the scenes for a long time, and the Joker being able to like leave the States and take off to like the Middle East, and then these things involving like Jason Todd showing up there, and then Jason Todd basically being beat to death and then blown up, right? All these things are basically a result of the network being involved, right? Giving the Joker information, giving the Joker resources, different things along those lines. It's a huge change to the Joker mythos, because over the years in those things, it always kind of felt like there was something else going on behind the scenes, but it added to the intrigue and the mystery of the Joker when he would just go off on these weird things and somehow attain the ability to travel internationally and no one really asking any questions, right? It was kind of like, I mean, how can the Joker get on an international flight, right? Like one of the most wanted criminals in the world. How does this guy board an international flight and leave the US? How does that happen, right? It's just one of those things that we as fans found ourselves asking, and it's James Tynion providing a bit of an answer. Whether or not you agree with it, that's really on you, right? I'm curious to see how people feel about it. I don't really care one way or the other, but I think it's cool, right? I think it's somewhat interesting. But the thing about this is that once, of course, Jim Gordon and Vengeance get into the home itself, everybody's just been shot up. And then at that point, you basically have the head lab tech. Now, of course, as soon as Vengeance sees Joker, because of her programming, she immediately goes and tries to attack him. And that's when the lab tech is just kind of like Orchard, Hammer, Obsidian. And those three words shut her down, right? Just, of course, again, a part of her mental conditioning. But there's this moment where the Joker and the tech start talking to Jim Gordon. And it's one of those things where Joker's like, you're here for the same reason I am, man. You have questions. Like, you want to know what's going on. And this guy's going to give us the answer. Now, the funny thing about this is this guy's eyes are given to us as like green eyes. And my initial thought here is this guy's under the control of the Joker. But it doesn't really look to be that way. It looks like that's just who he is, right? He's just really creepy looking with green eyes. But he says that like the Joker has, one, already wired the house to explode, so you probably shouldn't try anything. And two, the lab tech, the head lab guy is kind of like, I mean, you should leave, man. It's one of those things where he tells him like, what's going on here between myself and the Joker doesn't involve you. I mean, he says it specifically. He says, like, I suggest you leave now. You have your assault rifle, and I presume there's a car out front you drove up here with. Take both Vengeance and yourself and leave. And he says, like, my conversation with the clown does not concern you, your friends in Gotham City, or your new friend at Interpol, which is kind of a cool thing, because what this means, and this is interesting, it means he knows everything that Jim Gordon's been doing. And I love this idea because it ties more into the network than anything else. They have eyes and ears everywhere. That everything Jim Gordon has been doing is known to the network, because there are people there, whether it's some secretary somewhere or some high-ranking agent in Interpol, they've basically been reporting back, giving information to the network as they're supposed to do. And this allows allowed them to keep eyes and ears on what Jim Gordon is doing. And so it's kind of a funny thing, right? Because the Joker responds, he was like, Freddy, I told you Jim Gordon was a fast learner, right? He's one of us. So we don't need any secrets here. Now, I gotta say, every time I hear the Joker or read the Joker talking in DC Comics, I think of Mark Hamill from Batman the Animated Series. Who do you think of? Do you think of like Heath Ledger, or do you think of Mark Hamill? Like who? I'm just kind of curious for my own curiosity. But in the end, Dr. Friedrich Baum, of course, giving himself his name to Jim Gordon, says like he is a member of the network. But honestly, he refers to it as just kind of like a ridiculous name that's created by police and intelligence agencies because they don't know how else to define it. The reality here is the network is not really an organization itself operating behind the scenes, which is to say a giant council of people who like meet once a year and they decide how crime's going to happen in the world. It's not really that way. It breaks the tradition of what we're used to. So it's not like the Hellfire Club in Marvel Comics, right? It's not like the Court of Owls in DC Comics. It's not like that. Instead, the way he defines it is he says, we are independent players who work together to avoid attention of the authorities and the costume heroes and villains of the world. And so it's just like, I mean, we all do our own independent thing, but we pass information to each other. But if what you're expecting out of the network is that we are somehow some clandestine, shady organization that meets with black cloaks and tiki torches in some cave somewhere, that's not how this works. That's not what we do. And so he's like, you know, if you are going to stay here, Jim Gordon, then I might as well do with you what I did with the clown, which is to show you the laboratory and to show you everything that I do. Now, this is really, really sadistic and it's really screwed up, but it's kind of cool at the same time. So the way this lab works and what this guy says is he says, my original proposal was rather simple. He says, I grew body doubles for members of the criminal underworld able to pay my fees. And he says a DNA sample, some basic blood work, and biometric scans, and I'd be able to tailor one of my slugs to the target. Let's say a man was put away in prison for life. I could create a functional duplicate of the man and give that duplicate a heart attack or an aneurysm. They'd find the dead body in that prison cell. There was an artistry to it, matching the dental records, giving the body scars, making sure the hands and feet were calloused enough, paying off the guards to swap the dead body with the live person, and then killing the guards months later to ensure that no trail existed. And we give our clients new faces and identities and set them back out in the world with a whole new life. Painstaking work, but rewarding. Now, here's the thing about this, and this is there, it gets worse. Like, believe me, it gets worse here. But here's the thing. This is pretty genius, man. I mean, it really, really is. Because you have to believe that the different villains who exist out there in the world all have different desires. Maybe there's a villain out there who desires to like just experience what it's like to be convicted of murder and then like go to jail, right? Like they want to know what it's like to go through all that. So they commit a murder, they're arrested by the cops, they go to jail, right? They go through like the whole trial, and maybe the scene is so bloody and so obviously them that the trial just happens with a quickness. And so they're thrown in jail and they're like, this is really interesting. Okay, let's get me out of here. And they basically have this guy create a body double. And according to this guy, I mean, he was meticulous. If this person had a scar on their kneecap that they got when they were 10, a scar was put on the body double and it was made to look like it had been there since it was 10 years old. Everything matched perfectly. And then in turn, the bodies were switched and that was it. I mean, this is a level of planning and strategy that's just astronomical. Imagine if like, I mean, this is Batman level prep time. You know what I mean? Like it's crazy, right? Imagine if a person like this put their mind to task and like robbing banks or something like that. I mean, obviously his skills are much better served doing what he's doing because people are paying, you know, absorbent amount of money in order to do this, right? Just huge amounts of cash. But then he goes on and he says, there was another use for my work that I did not expect, though I did find the project stimulating. And he says, there are a number of very powerful individuals in the world who have grown fond of the taste of human meat. And so what this guy did, as crazy as it was, what he did is he basically broke down the body's traditional physical structure. And then what he would do in order to satiate the appetites of what were basically cannibals out there in the world is he would grow human bodies, but instead he would perfect the balance between fat, i.e. marbling, and like flesh. And so for those of you guys out there who are not really familiar with steak, like Kobe beef is kind of like the perfect meat out there. You might also hear it referred to as Wagyu, but like a Wagyu all-you steak will on average cost you about $200. But say for example, you wanted to order like a 20-ounce ribeye that was basically Wagyu, it'll cost you even more than that. It'll cost hundreds of dollars. And the reason why is because the meat is the perfect balance of like marbling and like meat itself, right? The perfect balance of like fat and meat. And so it makes it ridiculously tender. And I don't know if it's true or not, but I've heard that like out there in Japan, they massage the cows and give them like the best possible life and all that kind of stuff. That's what was going on here. I mean, I don't know if this guy was massaging these cadavers, but the point behind this is that that seems pretty grotesque, right? This guy just goes like, it just seems morbid, man. Like growing these bodies, like these brain dead bodies, and like putting them up on meat hooks and then massaging them. That just, I mean, it seems like something he would do. I'm not even gonna lie. God, that is so morbid. I don't know why I think it's funny. Anybody who's been around this channel long enough knows that like I don't know what it is, man, but I laugh at the most inappropriate times. I'm like Dr. Hibbert from The Simpsons. I'm imagining this guy massaging corpses and just being like, yes, this will make a fantastic meal. I don't know. It's just, it's weird. I got problems. I got problems, man. But give me a second, guys. But nonetheless, so the thing about this, right, is like literally that's what he would do. Like he said, there's like a dozen specialty restaurants around the world with secret menus, right? Just super high-end restaurants with secret menus that he supplies these bodies to. And those individuals who are familiar with this process and know about the secret menus can order flesh. Now, it's not as though they're going to be sitting on the table and be like, I'd like a leg of man, right? That's not really what they're ordering. It's just a particular name, right? And it's like, okay, like we'll serve this person just human flesh. It's pretty screwed up. Beyond that though, and it was really more of just like a personal desire, right? A personal interest in understanding all this is that one, as Dr. Baum talks to Jim Gordon, one of the things he says is, my operations here are never going to come to light, just so you know. Literally, this guy's like Jeffrey Epstein, right? Like he's in bed with everyone, right? Politicians, princes, like members of the royal family out in England, like everybody somewhere has done business with this guy. And so if he were to end up in jail and there's the potential that he would squawk, they'd silence him within hours. Within hours of him being arrested, he'd be a dead man because he just knows too much. And too many people would basically see their lives and reputations completely shattered because of the revelations this guy could bring to light. And so he's like, there's just too much at risk. Nothing I'm doing here is ever going to come to light. If you take what it is that I've done here and you go to the cops, you're gonna die. Like somebody out there somewhere, right? Some FBI agent or some politician or somebody, they're gonna know your name. They're gonna know that you know too much. You're gonna die before you heard the sound that killed you. That's exactly what's gonna happen. And so it's just kind of like, okay, like at that point, it's really kind of James Tynion telling us, this is it, right? I mean, Jim Gordon's getting a tour here, but nothing's going to come of this. And so of course the Joker kind of taunts him and says like, well, you know, it's him trying to get under your skin, whatever. But at the end of the day, it's this really interesting thing because they take him to the next stage, which is basically this guy, Dr. Baum, has been trying to clone the Joker. He's been trying to create Jokers, right? And in fact, he's actually trying to create 5 Jokers, 5 different versions of this guy. Now, what he says here is the process seemingly cannot be done. And the reason why is because when the Joker was exposed to the chemicals that turned him into what he is, that it basically altered his genetic material, which means that he does not have traditional human genetic material. The only way to duplicate the Joker successfully would be to get a sample of the Joker, which seemingly Dr. Baum has done, but even then, it still can't happen. Instead, what are in these tubes are like the Joker with like 2 heads, right? Like just these twisted, screwed up, grotesque versions of the Joker, all of which are basically laughing. And that's when Jim Gordon's like, good God, man, like, are they all alive? And it's like, I mean, in a way, I guess, you know, but like not traditionally, but it's grotesque, man. It's so screwed up. And that's the crazy thing is because like Jim Gordon immediately points the gun to the Joker and is just like, you're trying to make more of yourself. And the Joker's like, no, that's the joke, Jim. This is not me. I didn't want this, right? Like they wanted to do it. They wanted to create more of me. And the question that Jim Gordon, of course, asks here is why? Why would you want to create more of that guy? 1 is bad enough. Why would you want to make 5 more? And the response to Dr. Baum is like, why does anybody do anything, right? The challenge just intrigued me. And I was paid a significant amount of money to do so. And that's when Jim asks, like, who would want another one of him, right? Like who would want more Jokers? So seemingly someone is paying Dr. Baum to try to create more Jokers, meaning somebody out there wants more Jokers and it's not Joker himself, which really begs the question, who is it, right? Like, okay, answer that. Who do you think is funding this whole thing, right? Who do you think is trying to have more Jokers created? And I want your wildest guesses, right? If you think it's like the Riddler, if you think it's Two-Face, if you think it's like the Court of Owls, let me know who you think it is. But but before an answer can really be given here, of course, there's like a kind of giant crash that happens. And of course, they come to the conclusion that like essentially vengeance has woken up. And of course, there's a little bit of discussion here about how great vengeance is. It's kind of like an engineered organism and that kind of a thing. And of course, when the door gets smashed open, Dr. Bomb is kind of like, okay, vengeance, kill Joker and Jim Gordon, only for us to find out it's not vengeance, right? It's a member of the Sanford family. Now remember, the Sanford family have something to do with the Joker. We don't really know what. We know they're like a side plot, right? But we don't know exactly what their whole involvement and their whole role is here. And even now, it's a little mysterious. Like the only thing this chick says is, Uncle Sawyer always said that your lab meat tasted a bit off. You can't taste the fear of death in it. Makes the meat sweeter when it's been hunted proper. But I guess we're just a little old-fashioned down in Texas. And she says, the way our family sees it, we've been paying dues to your network for a long, long time. We think that affords us the chance to get a little messy. Y'all shouldn't have let our Uncle Billy die. And like, that's the only involvement that we get, right? Like literally there's, she's just like, okay, buddy, like take the Joker, let's get out of here. We're basically gonna feed the Joker, like we're gonna eat the Joker. And then her idea is to kill Jim Gordon. She literally just stabs him in the chest and leaves him for dead. But like all these roads are finally coming together, right? All these roads are finally connecting because we didn't really know what the Sanford family had to do with anything. All we knew is that Uncle Billy was basically this guy who had been busted for the murder of a whole bunch of teenagers who he had presumably consumed. He'd been in Arkham Asylum and then basically died, right? He was gassed to death, which seemingly happened because of the Joker. That seemed to be his involvement, so that seems to be where those two roads connect, that the Joker's responsible for the death of Billy. But beyond that, like, we didn't know what their involvement was. Obviously, they're tied into the network now, if for no other reason than the fact that that's where they've been getting their human flesh from in order to consume. But there's obviously something much bigger going on here, which we'll actually find out in the next issue or in the next video. Instead, what goes on is you basically switch over to these last few moments with Jim Gordon, where he's just kind of laying there. And quite literally, he's visited by Vengeance, who's just like, where in the hell is Joker? And he's like, the Joker went to Texas, that's all I really know. And so Vengeance just leaves Jim Gordon there. And it's just like, I'm not gonna save your life, but die knowing that you will have your vengeance, Jim Gordon. And so in these moments, he pulls out his phone, he makes a call to Barbara Gordon. And of course, Barbara, not realizing that he's injured, immediately starts talking, right? Immediately starts going through all this information that she has. And she says, like, I don't know what it is that's going on right now, but whatever it is, like, it's personal. And the reason why is because the Talon that's currently working for the Court of Owls is actually James Gordon Jr., the brother of Barbara Gordon and the son of Jim, who we all thought was dead. This story is getting amazing. With that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this to an end. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.